welcome to Gen Friends. I'm your host, Sherry Hudson-Passy from Carolina Girl Genealogy. And again, this fabulous panel, we've got Melissa Barker, the archive lady, with us tonight. Hi, Melissa.
Hello, hello. Great to be here.
It's always good to have you here. Laura Hedgecock from Treasure Chest of Memories is here. Hi, Laura.
Hi.
I like your
How is
fancy
everybody?
background tonight.
Thank you.
That looks really nice. Mary Kircher Roddy's here from MKR Genealogy. Hi, Mary.
Hi there.
With her fabulous quilt in the back that she made to commemorate COVID. It's a beautiful, wonderful quilt. I'm so glad that it's
my souvenir of pandemic.
Exactly. It's beautiful. Dan Earl, the family history guy, is with us. Hey, Dan.
Hello.
So good to have you here. And last but not least is Shelley Murphy, the family history. No, that's not right. Family tree girl.
I've changed the name.
You never know what I'm going to say. So sorry about that.
Good evening, everyone. Great to be here.
She's the family tree girl. All righty. And we have got a fabulous guest with us tonight. We have Lisa Lisson from Are You My Cousin? We're so glad that you're here.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Always good to have you here. Well, we have asked Lisa to come talk to us tonight about assuming things in genealogy. Now, none of us on this panel have ever assumed anything and found out that we were wrong, right? No, right. All the time. So we thought we would talk to Lisa about that and help us avoid those assumptions and stop us from, climbing the wrong tree if we make those assumptions. So Lisa, why don't you start us off by talking to us a little bit about assumptions, and then we'll.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I always feel like I should say this is really probably more talk about don't do what I did, but do it the right way. But
absolutely, we all feel that way.
We all have that. We all have that story. And so this happened. This is actually a story about my fourth great grandparents, and when I started out in genealogy, and it was, I had a lot. Guys, I had the family Bible. Like I had, and I had a lot of generations in the family who were still living, and I knew all the way back to my great grandfather, et cetera. So, I had a lot of information in the family. And so I'm starting genealogy research, and I'm filling out the tree, and I'm on Ancestry, I'm on Family Search, I'm pulling all the stuff up, and I get all the way back to literally my fourth great grandparents. And I'm thinking, man, this is really easy. Never assume genealogy is easy, right, guys? I mean, I think we've all been there.
Exactly.
And so, and I got stuck. And so the couple, the gentleman's name was Langley Talbot, and his wife was Sarah Blanks in the family Bible. And so I got, and there I stopped. For years, I'm sitting there stuck. I have no idea. I get the Talbot line goes all the way back. That one's well back into, back into England. But that Blanks line. So a few years ago, I was up at the Halifax County Courthouse in Virginia, and I love researching that courthouse, guys. You guys are gonna be so jealous. This is a small rural county courthouse. And 2 days a week, they have a volunteer there who's there to work with genealogy researchers. This guy has forgotten more about that county than I've ever known. It's fabulous. Wow. So yes, you always go on Thursday or Fridays. So, I mean, isn't that cool to be able to have that?
Very cool.
So I got to know, I've made a lot of trips up there and really gotten to know him well. And so then he's like, well, when he realized that, I was kind of serious about this whole genealogy thing. Then he took me to the basement. I'm like, yes.
Oh, yes.
Just so you know, it's a really good place to go if there's a really bad thunderstorm coming, just to tell you.
So wait, which county is this? Where is this?
This is Halifax County, Virginia.
Oh, okay.
So just
I have ancestors there. Oh, I'm going to go see them.
Oh, do you? Yes. Call ahead because I know he'd had some health problems, so call ahead, but it's Mr. Martin. And so, yeah, we could be related, Laura, because I think I'm related to a lot of that county. So anyway, just so you know, my maiden name was Talbot. That was the maiden name. And so anyway, so like, I'm researching, and we're down there looking for a completely different family line. And so we're looking through things, and we're going through the chancery records, and we're going through superior court records, and we're going through, what did he found? I don't even know where he was at, but he was pulling things left. He was finding every Talbot he could find, and everybody, he was pulling it for me. And this was a grand jury summons for Langley Talbot, Sarah Blanks, for living in open adultery in 1848. So here's the kicker, though.
So not closed adultery.
No, it was open adultery.
They weren't
But
hiding anything.
Here's the thing. They'd already been in like a 25-year relationship by the time that thing was made.
Right.
They'd been in a relationship since like 1823.
Yeah.
And so apparently they got on somebody's bad side because they brought him up before adultery. And I was like, whoa. So then when I realized, so my first assumption was that Sarah and Langley got married. And so don't ever assume that your ancestors actually got married.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. It's interesting that they were in the family Bible. So obviously whoever wrote it in the family Bible probably didn't know that they weren't married, or they wouldn't have put it in the family Bible.
Wait till we get to the rest of the story, Cheri. It was well known in the family.
But wait, there's
she was even, so, okay, I have to go in my defense here, because number one, I had her in the family Bible as Sarah Blanks.
Yeah.
I had a birth date and I had her death date. And then when I went back, there was no marriage date. I probably should have clued into that. But granted, I mean, this was like one of the first, this was like early genealogy stuff for me. So if you track her through the records, you'd find her with the surname of Talbot. You'd find her with Langley's surname frequently. They had children. They had like 6 children, and they all had the surname of Talbot. They all had Langley's surname. So, and get this, her father-in-law, she's in his will. So basically, Langley's father was making provisions for his grandchildren in the event that his son died. But the language was something to the effect that the children born to Sarah Blanks after such and such date, like 1823, which is how we knew how long they had been in a relationship. And so it was like, again, I didn't pick up on that early in my research. I didn't pick up that was different. Over the years, as I'd go back to it, I'm thinking, that's a really odd way to put things. They don't usually put the terminology that way. And so, my genealogy gut was starting to kick up a little bit, but I still couldn't figure out what to do with it. So eventually, I needed to get into those chancery records for Virginia. And Laura, if you've ever researched in Halifax County, when I'm ready, we found that record. And so that I thought I need to find out more about those chancery records, because I was starting to see evidence. Both of them were getting sued for like not paying their tab at the general store. I mean, there was some really wonky stuff going on with this couple. So they were showing, I'm like, I need the chancery records. Well, what had happened is the Library of Virginia had come into Halifax County Court and taken all the chancery records out to get them digitized. And that was a 2-year project. So for 2 years, I had to sit and wait for these things to come about. Well, they finally made it online. They are online, Laura. They're digitized and online.
Where do you live, Lisa?
I live in Raleigh.
Oh, okay.
So I'm just 2 hours south of Richmond. How about you?
I'm in Michigan, which is the problem with doing research in Halifax County.
It is, but I will tell you that, like I said, the Chancery Court records are digitized. So they're there for the Library of Virginia. So I finally got into those. And what I find is Sarah Blanks dies in the 1870s. And her children, or the children of the couple, have to sue their father to get some of the money from a land that he had sold on her behalf. So here's how it all came out. Everybody in the world knew that this couple never married. She was a widow. Her first husband's name was Thomas Blanks. They married in 1820. He died in 1821. They had one child who died in the Civil War. And she, in 1823, apparently had already taken up with Langley Talbot. But when her husband died, she had land, and she had an enslaved person, and so she had some means.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it turns out when you get into those chancery records more, Langley had a gambling problem, and she didn't want to marry him because she didn't want to lose what she had.
Right.
But well, she sort of still kind of lost it because she wanted to sell her land. But because she was a woman, though she could legally do it, the guy wouldn't work with her.
Ah.
So Langley takes the money and goes and sells the land to the man. Only Langley puts the land in his name. He doesn't put it in her name. And she was livid.
What
And
great
this happened somewhere
records these are.
yeah, I mean, she was, I think she probably could have been kind of a scary woman. This is all laid out over a multi-year period in the Chancery records after she died. And there are multiple depositions in there that the couple never married. Everybody knew that Langley did this with that land, and that she was furious about it. And so the children were suing their father to get the land back, to get the money for the land that he had sold.
Wow. Oh, wow.
So, and then also somewhere in there, I then find the deposition that Langley is legally declared insane.
Oh, no.
Yep, these are my people. These are my people. It's great. I mean, really, it really is pretty cool. But so what it did, I mean, I assumed they did exactly what they were supposed to do, that they got married and they, even if she'd been a widow, okay. Once I realized that was a first marriage, was not probably a maiden name, I was able to open up what happened to her first marriage. But it definitely just totally, I mean, it stalled me for years in my research.
And I think a lot of times when we find those brick walls, we need to start thinking about, why is this not? Why am I not finding anything? Or am I making assumptions? Are there other, avenues I should be, looking at? Like, is this a second marriage?
Mm-hmm.
Is this an adopted child? Is whatever it might be, or do I have the wrong name altogether? So we've got to do those kind of things. Melissa's got a question.
Yeah.
Well, it's a little bit of a two-parter question. You're in the South like me. I'm in Tennessee. And so you're talking about chancery courts. The records I just showed you, those things that I just showed you, they came from a chancery court divorce. And so I was wondering, of the other people on the panel, when of course Cheri's in the South, and of course Virginia, or Family Tree Girl. Is it chancery courts? I'm sure it's not called chancery courts everywhere. Chancery courts for us is, I'm guessing it's the same for you, Lisa. It's divorces, it's probate, it's even some civil suits.
It's a little more along the lines of civil type.
Is that also called the court of equity? Because
we don't have that court of equity in Tennessee. We just have chancery court, circuit court, general sessions.
We've got court of equity. I've seen those records. And what I do is because sometimes they get all mixed up together. They're supposed to be one certain thing. And I think the best records are the miscellaneous. Because you have to look in those know what you're going to find in the miscellaneous. So, but that's a really good point, Melissa, is that records are called different things from state to state and from time period to time period.
Yes.
So, the courts can change. They can decide this court system is going to hold these types of records now, or they just throw it in there because they don't know where else to put it. So.
I think that's important, and I know Lisa and I have talked about this in the past. It's important to do your research about the records and where the records are located, because even for us, where we are in our county, you could file for a divorce in 3 different courts, either in the chancery, the circuit, or the county court clerk's office. In 1985, for some unknown reason, they took and didn't allow the county court clerks, in our county only, by the way, to do divorces there. They could only do them in chancery court and circuit court. So when you're going to look for these records, I mean, you could have a divorce in 1983 and it could be in any of those courts, but in 1986, it's only going to be in these courts. So it's important to know your records.
Exactly. Let's see. Shelley had a question.
Yeah, well, first, thank you for calling out the Library of Virginia. I appreciate that. And second, you're making me think about, and some will know about my William Michael Murphy and his parents. And what you're saying about Miss Banks, I'm sitting here thinking, even though, say, the great-grandmother marries the second time, but she marries with the Murphy name. And I'm sitting here thinking, and again, it's an assumption that they've been naming. They've never been married. I've never found a marriage record on them. But again, I'm thinking, okay, Murphy to be Nellie Murphy when she marries the second husband. So I'm going to take another route, and start looking at it differently, and plus apparently he dies or something happens, don't know, for her to be able to marry the second person. And again, because I saw Murphy on the new marriage, I'm making an assumption. So great tip, and thank you for that. Because now welcome. I've got to turn that thinking around and say, they probably weren't married. She just took the name.
Yeah.
And see what records I can find. And there could be even I don't know about Illinois, could be a chance. I don't know, because I don't know where he died or where he was born. But I just know that's supposedly the father. But I'm just going to have to think about that and come up with a new strategy. Because I'm assuming they're married, because she had Nellie Murphy instead of McCorkle, marrying the second husband.
Does anybody else have an assumption story they want to share?
Wow. Well, I think we talked a few weeks ago that there's lots of cases where we assume the marriage took place in the state where the people lived before and after the marriage. But there's a lot of reasons people cross state lines to get married. I think we've discussed that in a recent show.
Could be money or a quicker process.
Or that there's some kind of conditions like age and permission of the parents or what have you.
That's true too, yes.
And it can have to do with weather and time of year, actually. I had I was struggling to find one, and a very seasoned researcher up in the foothills of North Carolina said, Lisa, what time of year did they get married? And I'm like, I don't know. Because if it was winter, they typically went one direction, and if it was spring or summer, they went the other direction, depending on the river and all that.
Oh, that makes sense.
Oh, wow.
Never even thought about the impact of the
late
land.
Returns on marriage is just like death and birth. There's late returns. So that could be one of the reasons.
Mary, did you have a question or a statement?
Well, I just had a kind of a reverse assumption story. I had a family story that my grandfather was divorced. Now, his name was Ira Brown. He was born in Ohio. I had an inkling he lived in Oklahoma, and he got married to my grandmother when he was 40 in California. So I had a really long period of where this supposedly short-lived marriage could have happened in lots of places. And the guy's name was Brown. I mean, I'm never going to ever find this. And so I really basically, I probably did one half-hearted attempt and thought, this is just ridiculous. I just don't know enough, and I'll just have to wait till I get to heaven to get the answer on that one. But I was able to, something came to me about a pension file. So sometimes the workarounds in documents that you don't expect to find things in, you can solve some of those problems that really look insurmountable.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Yeah. Melissa, you said you've got a story?
These are great stories, and I hope that whoever's watching this, if you're a new genealogist or not a new genealogist, because a lot of times I think we do a lot of our assumptions when we've just started genealogy or learning about how to do genealogy. So it's always great to hear that other people had this. And so I've had lots of them, but two of them that came to mind are with the same person that I had assumption stories. And it's for my husband's third grandfather, Jesse Glasgow. The first one was when I found his Civil War military records. He lived in Tennessee. He joined a Union regiment. He joined an Illinois regiment. And so when I saw that, I thought, oh, well, when did he go to Illinois? And he lived in a town called Cumberland City, which is in Stewart County, Tennessee. Well, that's also the same county that Fort Donelson is in. If anybody has any ancestors that was at the Battle of Fort Donelson, it's only about 20 minutes from my house. But I'm researching and I'm thinking, well, when did he go to Illinois? Well, when I learn and you do study about stuff, I learned, you know what, he didn't go anywhere. He went over to Fort Donelson when the Illinois regiment was there, and he enlisted there. So that was an assumption that I had to, okay, well, that helps you now from now on to understand that. The second assumption story with him was I got these packet of papers from the Stewart County Archives that, great story how I got those. But it's a packet of papers of just nothing but receipts and invoices and all kinds of stuff. But one of the things that was in there was a receipt where he had purchased a Louisiana lottery ticket in 1888.
Really?
And I thought, when did he go to Louisiana?
No, when did the lottery start?
The lottery started just in I want to say 1856 or just after the Civil War, because
Really?
that took me down a rabbit hole.
I was going to say.
just search for the Louisiana lottery and just put in 1888. Believe me, General P.T. Beauregard and General Jubal Early were over it, and it was very scandalous and all kinds of bad stuff. Anyway,
well, Jubal Early was involved in anything was scandalous.
Yeah.
And his namesake, my great-great-grandfather, was scandalous. They were related,
but
they named him after him.
Yeah. Oh, if you want to go down a rabbit hole, look up the Louisiana lottery in the 1800s. But anyway, so I'm thinking, well, when did he go to Louisiana? Well, no, he didn't go to Louisiana. When I found newspapers it would be his hometown newspaper, advertising the lottery, and you could send money to get a lottery ticket.
Wow.
But is it so good?
You know, those are things you're just like,
yeah.
But you know, what's wonderful about assumptions, there's a lot of not good things with assumptions, but one good thing about assumptions is it helps you to learn.
Yes.
I think Lisa would actually, you know, when you make those assumptions and then you find out, oh, no, it's this, you learn. And so when the next time you don't make that assumption.
Absolutely.
And I think the thing, it makes you learn. It also hones what I like to call my genealogy gut. When, you know how when you're reading record, you know, we'll look at those records sometimes, and, you know, over the years, you know, it's not quite sitting right, or, you know, whatever, you get data and you're thinking it fits, but it's just not.
Yeah.
My gut tells me there's something else. And I think I've learned to listen to that more now. And I think we all do that, you know, because you just start to understand their thinking, for lack of a better, you know, that I try so hard to get into their heads.
I ask the question why now more than I ever have.
Why? Absolutely. And we've got to remember too that people lived and did some of the same things. They lived the same ways that people live now. And I think sometimes that assumption that we have is, oh, they never did that. Nobody would have had a baby out of wedlock. Nobody would have not gotten married. Nobody would have, those are some assumptions I think we have of our ancestors because of the time period they lived in. When we start researching them and we realized, oh yeah, they're people just like.
Well, and we think about that with the female ancestors, the women, because, and Melissa, you know, she actually talked about this on my YouTube recently, that even though they're not in the records per se, you know, we have a tendency to think they lived very quiet lives. Well, obviously this woman did not live a quiet life. And, you know, and they didn't, they were actually, you know, they were living full lives. And I think we forget that sometimes.
Yes.
And it's always trying to think back what records would have been created out of that.
Exactly. Laura,
out of that life.
Did you have a
Yeah, I have a different bent on it. I think too, on the storytelling side of it, I think we make tons of assumptions. And an example that comes to mind is we find that an ancestor was a member of the church their entire lives, or they were a dink. And then we say, oh, well, this was an upstanding man. He did, you know, and that just doesn't always pan out. And we create these one-dimensional ideas of our ancestors based on these tiny little, this record here and this record here. And we forget that we need to fill out that, or we forget what we don't know that about them, and that one kind of indication doesn't mean that's what they were. It's really all it is he was a member of the church. It doesn't mean he was a wonderful person. And then my story though about assumptions is in Matt's family, his great grandfather died of tuberculosis right around the turn of the century, and there was all sorts of records about him moving to Boulder, Colorado for his health, where the Seventh-day Adventist Church had a big TB sanatorium. So I always assumed he was there.
Yeah.
And so when I wrote to this the local genealogy society, I said, can I find any records? And she wrote back and said, no, you can't, but we found records that show he didn't live there. She said he was probably getting daily treatments, and Boulder was generally recognized as being good for health, but he was never inpatient there. From the records that she found, she's like, no, I can't give you records of that, but I can prove that you're wrong.
Well, at least she could do that for you.
No, that's wonderful. Yeah.
Exactly.
But yeah, that just seemed like such a simple, like dot to dot to dot assumption. He had TB. He moved to Boulder. That's where the TB sanatorium.
The same thing. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I think too, as beginners, we assume that the records that we're finding are correct, and I think that's one thing that beginners really struggle with. And unless they've taken a lot of classes and somebody's told them to beware of that, is vital records. I mean, this is a government record, right? It's got to be correct, and I've got several that are not correct. Death certificates with the wrong maiden names for mothers. All this.
Census.
The people, census records.
When you don't even know who gave the information.
Exactly, right. And you don't know.
Or who lied the information.
Yeah, who lied the information. Yeah. What would have been a reason, I have learned to ask, that somebody wasn't telling the truth on this record?
I think one of the
records, pension records, they'll say anything because they want that pension, right?
Yes. I think one of the biggest assumptions that we all make, whether you're beginner, intermediate, or wherever you are, because I just think we all still do it, is, and this is coming from my archivist background, is when you hear the courthouse was burned.
Yes.
Or you talk to an official in the town and they say, oh, well, those records were thrown away. Yeah. I never believe that because of the stories and things I've experienced. The same county I just talked about, Stewart County, Tennessee, where Fort Donelson is, the Union was going to burn the courthouse. Well, we all know the courthouse was burned. But did you not know that the citizens went there and talked to the Union and said, hey, let us take our records out before you burn the courthouse.
Oh, wow.
And they said, yes, go ahead. So they took the records out, stored them in the cave. The Union burned the courthouse. That archives has records dating back to 1803.
Oh my gosh.
But people hear the courthouse was burned. Oh, I'm done. Or you talk to an official who maybe doesn't really know all the information, and they say, oh, they were thrown away. That's why I would say, don't ever give up. Right now in my archives, we have what I call missing records from the time we were founded in 1871 to 1956 when our new courthouse was built, because they took all the records out of the old courthouse until the new one was built. The assumption was they were to all be brought back. Well, the theory is some were stored somewhere and they got thrown away.
Yeah.
They may have, but I am not believing that until the day I die, probably. But, I'm thinking one day someone's going to find them in an attic in a basement or something.
Yeah, sure.
That's what happened actually in one of the counties in North Carolina research. And I mean, the woman was like, she goes, yeah, they were supposed to take them back. She says, I don't think they all made it back. I'm like, no, ma'am, they didn't.
No.
I'm still looking.
Yeah.
And so I was like going, so whose basements could I? I'm like,
exactly.
Who has some? Let me know if you can think of anybody. Yes, I need to get those.
I was thinking of another assumption that I made as I was interviewing my family members as I was beginning, and they would say to me, I don't know anything, and I don't have anything. Never believe that. Never believe that, because, they have things, they don't realize that those are things that will be important to you. I think they're thinking of, I don't have a Bible or a journal, you know, so, and they don't, like my great-grandfather who told me he had, my grandfather who told me he had nothing on his father, my great-grandfather, and when my grandfather died, we found the papers where he had been in World War I, and they were his discharge papers. So it gave me all this information about where he'd served, but he swore, I have nothing on my father. So I don't know, maybe sometimes we have to get permission to dig. I don't know.
Well, you know, my dad said something interesting to me when I started all this. And I mean, he was more than willing to share family stories and stuff that he knew. And he's been on several research trips with me up to Halifax County, day trip type things. Because he spent early part of his life in South Boston. And, you know, you get more and more stories. He said, you know, he said, it just gets me thinking. He said, you ask a question. He said, I might not remember it like today, but next week or tomorrow, I may, then it'll remind me of this. And so it's, you know, I'm fortunate enough. I mean, my dad is still living and in good health, and we're, you know, that I've got this kind of rolling type of oral history that comes from him. Not everybody has that, unfortunately, but I do. And so that's been a nice way to hear that kind of thing. And you're right, it's the little things. I have an example of that where I got to interview the matriarch of one side of my family. And I mean, like 6 months before she passed away, I went up to the nursing home. I didn't know, she'd never met me. I mean, I'd never met her. The family never met me. It's like all the kids, I mean, it was crazy. But anyway, so I go in and I'm like, and she's so hard of hearing, bless her heart. But we get over all that. And I finally said, you know, all the nice, I'm like, who was William's father? This is what I'm trying to get. I'm like, who was he? And she goes,
confession.
She said, I don't know his real name. She said, I don't remember the real name, but we always called him Kaz. And I was like, score! That's it. That's the one. Kaz. It was a nickname for Caswell, which was his name. His name was Stephen Caswell Haley. And she's like, well, we always called him Kaz. And this family always went by middle names for whatever reason. But yeah, so it was like, yes. You know, I mean, that was a very little tiny thing that, you know, nobody would ever
But look what it did. Look what it did.
Look what it did. A whole nother line, actually.
It did. It confirmed 2 more generations back, you know, by being able to make that connection kind of thing. And she had no idea. I mean, she's the only one in the family who had that in her head. She was so funny. I have to say this. So she was a generation apart from my grandmother, but they were basically about 2 years apart in age. So when, you know, I introduced her, you know, who my great-grandmother, she knew my great-grandmother, you know, who my grandmother was. She goes, is she still living? I'm saying, yes. She goes, does she have her mind?
Does she have her mind?
So that's a Southern expression, isn't it?
Oh, yeah,
that in her teeth.
Yes. A few weeks later, I'm visiting my grandmother, who was actually in Greenville, South Carolina, Cheri, at a nursing home. And I was telling her about my visit with Dorothy, and she goes, oh, wow. She goes, does she have her mind? This is all they wanted to know.
That's hilarious.
Hey, Dan, Dan's been awful quiet. Do you have you've never made a single assumption?
Never made a single assumption.
No, I don't know what you guys are talking about. I've done my genealogy perfectly. I mean, I got started when I was 10, and I was a really brilliant 10-year-old. Never made any assumptions. I never assumed things like, you know, my grandma would lie to me about things, you know, because she always told the truth. I just assumed that adults always told the truth. And as I got older, I realized that no, grown-ups lie a lot. And that's one genealogical truth, is that just assume that your ancestor was lying about anything that they said.
100%.
It will save you so much heartache.
It will. Just assume every family story is completely fabricated.
Dan, you've heard
shred of truth.
Dan, you've heard my Halifax County grandmother. So her story, from the time I knew her, was her mother died when she was 6. And her dad didn't want to raise her, so she was raised in an orphanage, and she barely could remember her father's last name. So that was told unerringly all my life. passed when she died and when both my parents died. That was the story, that she had an idea that the last name might have been Dunaway, but that's all she knew. Well, my aunt on my mom's side sent me a census record. And
Laura, can you pause for a second? Was the last name like Dunaway, like D-U-N-A, or was it Dun away, like
I know.
like D-O-N-E space away?
Away.
I just wanted to clarify for people that may.
Laura, don't feed into Dan.
No.
All right, continue. Sorry, continue.
Sorry.
Okay, so my aunt on the other side, since my parents were gone, she decided to help me, and she's like, I think I found your grandmother on a census record, and she's living with her dad. I'm like, no, 1820 couldn't be. Well, there she was. She was living with her father and her stepmother. So this orphan had 11, count them, 11 siblings,
Wow.
all of whom grew up in Halifax County. My dad was raised as an only child in Pittsylvania County. And she just lied.
So why? Do you know why?
I have theories. My theory is that there was some kind of abuse, probably even sexual abuse, that she was ashamed. I don't know whether it was in the family or not. So she went to Richmond and she worked as a seamstress. I have no idea how she met my grandfather. But later in life, when she was having, well, she didn't have her head anymore. She was always terrified of being raped. She always locked the doors and locked the doors, and she'd pin all the curtains shut and things like that. And so I suspect that there was something that she felt ashamed of or embarrassed by, or maybe she was even afraid of someone in it. But I did make internet acquaintance with one of my dad's cousins who confirmed that the rest of the family did not ever talk about Jetty. Wow. And that she was there and then she was gone, and it was just something that was never discussed.
Wow. There's some trauma there.
There's some big trauma there.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But so she had her reasons. Obviously.
And there usually are, you know, when you find those kind of things, there's a reason. It might not be something as traumatic as that. It's usually something like they're lying about their age because they want to get married or they want to go into the military. Yes, Dan.
So speaking of lying about their age, so when my grandmother immigrated from Hungary to the United States, she was 11, but on the ship manifest, both the incoming ship manifest at Ellis Island and also the one where they left England, both of them show her as 9, and they show her 13-year-old sister as being 11, but their 4-year-old sister was listed as 4. And so that was always really sort of befuddling to me. And then a distant cousin of mine on a different line had a letter from my grandmother's grandfather to my grandmother's uncle, who was already living in the United States. And in it, he said that, you know, that Anton and Mary are trying to save up enough money to go. And I was like, I wonder how much it costs. And on the ship line that they came on, when you were 12, you had to pay as an adult.
Right.
And so they had enough money for 2 adults and 3 kids, not 3 adults and 2 kids.
Wow.
And so they had to get the 13-year-old to lie to government officials in both England and the United States, and the 11-year-old to lie to government officials in both England and the United States. Wow. And the 4-year-old stayed 4 because you can't trust a 4-year-old to lie to government officials. That's
no, because they're going to say, Daddy said.
Daddy told me to tell you. So she was 4, right? So I have a She's very happy about being 4, right? And so she stayed 4. Right? Erin stayed 4. Like they weren't going to, like she was going to tell the truth no matter what. And so the 2 older girls that they could trust to lie about their age. Otherwise they would have had to leave. And they already married off one of their sisters or one of their daughters to another man in Hungary when she was 16, because it was either that or they had to wait even longer to save more
Right.
money
Right.
to go. And so they
Right.
were desperate to get out of the situation that they were in. And
So you think they told the 13-year-old liar will marry you off?
could be.
Yeah.
But I think it was just like, hey, you have to tell them that you're 11.
Yeah.
Because, you know, a 13-year-old girl could pass for 11 and
sure.
an 11-year-old girl could pass for 9, you know.
Sure.
And so
Sure.
they did the best that they could. They
Yeah.
were, you know, third class steerage people and
Yeah.
just enough to get here. And so it's neat when you can solve that and figure out why the assumption that you'd made that, you know, your grandma always tells the truth. Or that maybe they just got the age wrong on 2 documents on 2 different continents. You know, they're just crazy. You know how people are that write documents. You know, they get stuff wrong all the time.
Well, the numbers are different in English.
Right, yeah.
Different in English.
So,
guys, this has been so much fun. I love this. This is great. Lisa, did you have any last minute things you want to say about assuming or?
No, I mean, I think we've all kind of had that experience, and just, you know, it really speaks to getting beyond the records and really getting into your ancestors' head as much as you can. It's more than just finding, you know, just the basics, birth, marriage, and death. It is getting into their lives to see why they might have. There's a lot of social, you have to get into my favorite topic, social history, to understand.
My favorite too.
Is it your favorite? To understand, we have to be related, you know. But to have to get into the social history and to really understand people's motivations, because when you understand what was important to them, then you can start to rebuild that life and get into it. Because if it's important to them, it's important to you. Like money was important, obviously, to Dan's immigrant ancestors coming over, and they had to be careful with it, and so it's important to the story.
Absolutely.
Anyway,
Absolutely. No, you're great. Thank you. Go ahead, Dan. Did you?
Oh yeah, and she was super frugal her whole life, because even when she married my grandfather and they had means and things like that, she was always just super frugal about everything and used every last scrap of everything. She used the bacon grease to make her own lard. She used, I mean, just everything, even though she didn't have to. They still just carried that on, you know, through that generation and even into my mom's generation. So,
and I always think that that's fascinating when we can see where those traits came from through the records, through our research. So,
I have one last comment before we end, following up with what Melissa said, or the comment about the burned counties. And I just did a presentation for a group of folks on the 1890 census. That's another assumption that there's nothing there.
You're right.
And I walked that group through the questions on the 1890 census. The first 1 through 25, then the second page was 1 through 30. And then I took an ancestor and answered every one of those questions, you guys, that was on the 1890 census.
Shelley, it sounds like another show.
Yeah. I'd love to
I will do it. That's fine. I'll just send you the PowerPoint because you guys can figure it out. But I walked back through there because that was an assumption that either Bern County or, wait a minute, we got a 20-year gap here.
Yeah.
And you know what? I was able to answer every one of those questions, and it was so simple. I felt bad talking about it. No, seriously, based on the questions, because we're assuming there's nothing there, and it was really simple. And so the name of it was, Is It Really Missing?
Oh, I love that.
Oh, that's a great, that's a great
one.
one.
But it was fun walking through it, because it was like, are you kidding me? Just like when you talked about not seeing a marriage record on that assumption on that ancestor. And you know now that's the first 10 things you're looking for.
Right.
And, you know, and it was the same thing. We're going to assume there is something missing. So again, good linkage there.
Well, it's like Lisa said, you have to think outside the box, and just, and Shelley's exact.
I say stay in the box. Don't jump out, because that's where you go down the rabbit. Stay in the box and keep digging and go in the box. Don't jump out that box.
Oh no, I'm like, you got to get out of the box.
No, don't get out of the box. You got to reverse that thinking, because that's why we go down the rabbit holes and start dealing with and knowing the community that Melissa said, number one. Number two, Lisa, don't make an assumption. Stay in that box and keep digging and resolve what you're dealing with within that box. All right, now my teacher hat's coming up.
I think you guys are actually on the same page,
Yes.
because
I think we
one's
are, too.
calling it a box. It's basically
Yes.
by not making the assumption,
Exactly.
Exactly.
you're
Yeah.
keeping the box big.
Keep the
That's
box. Yeah,
it.
that's it.
I love you guys. This is so much fun. I love our time together. Unfortunately, it's got to come to an end because nobody's going to want to watch a 3-hour show. So we would talk because we would talk for
Now,
3
Cheri,
hours.
you're assuming.
Oh, that's true. Anybody out
You're
there
right,
who wants to
Melissa.
watch
And it's probably right.
You are right. Get out a brick wall Zoom session.
That's
You know, yeah,
Exactly.
it's going to be an hour, hour and a half, 2
Okay.
hours. No, it's after midnight. What happened when we started at 7 and we were still didn't want to shut down?
Absolutely,
Anyway.
but that's because y'all were all talking to each other, not just listening. So that's why. Oh, thank you, everybody. I loved your stories, your examples. Lisa, thank you so much for coming on and getting us
Oh,
going
yes.
with this. This has
You're
been
welcome.
great. We appreciate it. You know you're always welcome. So thanks, everybody. And with that, we will say goodbye, and we'll see you next time on Gen Friends. Bye, everybody.
Bye, guys.